psychedelics are a big part of our thesis.
Have we a bit of a ceiling here? And
The infrastructure needs to change. The commercial hurdle is still super high.
I think we underestimate how important that piece of the puzzle is.
I think that the big capital is only starting now.
It's huge news, and I think it goes underreported.
The next year to 2 years are definitely going to be very interesting.
Welcome to the Evolving Minds podcast by Pink Elephant. Insightful conversations with the entrepreneurs, executives, and changemakers shaping the future of psychedelic therapy and progressive mental health. Meet the minds, changing the business of healing.
Today's guest is Maria Velkova, managing partner at Tabula Rasa Ventures. From working with big pharma to investing in psychedelic startups, Maria has been deeply involved in innovative new industries. In this episode, we discuss a range of topics, from what's next for the psychedelics industry to investment opportunities in fields like AI and women's health. Stay tuned for this deep dive into the evolving landscape of healthcare innovation. All right, we're here with Maria Velkova. Maria, nice to speak with you.
You too, Jason. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, nice to see you again. Why don't we start off with a brief intro, a little bit about your story and some of your work, just to give the audience an introduction.
Yeah, absolutely. So currently a managing partner at Tabula Rasa Ventures. It's an early stage investment fund which focuses on investing in companies that are building the future of human health. And that stands on 4 pillars of creating a future healthcare system that is more personalized, more holistic, more preventative, and more democratized. And of course, psychedelics are a big part of our thesis and have been historically, not only from the investment side, but also from our nonprofit side. We have a nonprofit organization, Energia, which does impact initiatives around the world in terms of education and advocacy. We've done events during Davos, during the World Economic Forum, and also all the way to the Middle East. Have worked with Abu Dhabi Department of Health on several conferences, which was the first time that psychedelics were openly spoken about in the Middle East. In terms of my background, which I feel like is going to be important for this conversation, I was trained as a pharmacologist and also have an advanced degree in biomedical sciences. After that, I spent around a decade working in big pharma for big pharmaceutical companies such as AstraZeneca, AbbVie, Pfizer, GSK, Novartis, Roche, you name it, and mostly focusing on large global projects spanning across the end-to-end pathway of getting a drug from the lab bench to the market and to patients. In 2020, decided to leave corporate. I was extremely interested in psychedelic therapeutics and longevity. And at that time, I met my business partner and we started building our funds, which launched in January of 22. And we're currently actively deploying the rest of the funds in the pieces that I mentioned.
Very interesting. So Tabula Rasa is still active, still looking for the next unicorn out there. How's that going?
Yeah, that's going great. We have extensively covered the psychedelics space, and all of our track record before launching the fund was in psychedelics. But as I mentioned, we are more broadly looking at the future of human health, actually focusing on automated science right now, how to use AI for R&D optimization and lab orchestration, but that's for another conversation.
Yeah, I guess brings up an interesting point. I mean, you said you started in 22. Do you feel that we've hit a bit of a plateau in terms of opportunities and innovation in the psychedelic medicine space? You know, we had the big boom, and there's been a market downturn extended. Maybe, a lot of smaller companies went away. Have we hit a bit of a ceiling here and we need to, capital is looking to go elsewhere?
Actually, quite the opposite. The industry has followed a very classic hype curve where we have new and emerging spaces. So, as you mentioned, there's typically an initial boom, and then a rising tide raises all boats. And as the industry is beginning to mature, and this is a very highly regulated industry, even more so than classic pharma, given the history of psychedelics and the current legislation and regulation. But what I see with the industry is that it's becoming more mature. So to your point, a lot of the smaller players, which don't have the necessary rigor, experience, and expertise in navigating this highly regulated space and process of getting a drug through the FDA into market, have fallen out, which is quite natural with these new emerging spaces. I'm very excited to see that the industry is maturing and the larger players who are able to build uh, well-rounded, multi-stakeholder aligned teams with the appropriate expertise in getting a drug to market are the ones that we're seeing now are doing pretty well. And I think we're at the very beginning of a real boost. At the same time, we have to caveat that psychedelics is a small space. Although there's some interesting developments that go beyond mental health, and we're yet to see rigorous data coming out from clinical trials on some of the other indications. Um, and also, if we take it down to fundamentals, trauma is the root cause of many both mental and physical ailments that we see. And as we learn more, how the mind affects the body and trauma entrenches a lot of autoimmune disease and neurodegeneration and some of the more other systemic impacts of trauma, I think we will have opportunity for um, big label expansions of the drugs that are currently coming out for mental health into other indications.
There definitely will be that expansion, I guess, horizontally after some approvals. I did have a thought that the industry is maturing in terms of there's been some consolidation. The players that are left are now in advanced final stages with the FDA. That they've got, it seems like they've got enough capital to really get drugs through approval. So in that sense, there's a maturity, but it seems to be, or it is, all centered around drug development. I wonder if now that the industry has kind of gained legitimacy in the mainstream establishment, is there opportunities now for kind of like periphery psychedelic companies to sprout up, maybe around delivery, around services, around clinics, where now that the industry has got its legs under it?
Absolutely. As we were refining our thesis of, taking our history of being very active in psychedelics and kind of what does the future healthcare system look like. Um, for us, we've been always quite adamant on the picks and shovels. We call it enabling infrastructures and technologies for this future of health, which includes things like psychedelics and other stuff. Um, our traditional healthcare systems and medical culture is really focused on symptomatic treatment uh, once something is already wrong. In order to transform from that to something that is more preventative and personalized, the infrastructure needs to change. And when I say infrastructure, that's everything. How do we deliver care? How do we train therapists? How do we pay for therapist time? How do we capture data? How do we manage patients long term and continuously? All of these things are increasingly important and very relevant for psychedelics, which are multimodal intervention that includes not just an SSRI drug, that you take at home, but it takes really trauma-informed, personalized care, joining the drug with the therapy. And not only during the session, but also there's preparation for this type of intervention. And there's, most importantly, um, a follow up, which includes integration and guidance during that critical period after a therapy session with psychedelic assisted therapy is the most crucial part, almost, in order to get long term um, efficacy and uh, the most important step of getting a patient to remission, or at least very long term remission. So, with that said, um, now that we are getting closer and closer to market with the first psychedelic assisted therapies, it's becoming more and more relevant to invest and to channel capital into these enabling technologies and infrastructure. Most of the capital has gone to the drug side, but now it's absolutely crucial, because even if these medicines are approved by the FDA, the commercial hurdle is still super high. And we need to start thinking about that. And there's a very big opportunity for investing in that, which ultimately will dictate the next hurdle of, once approved, getting these medicines to patients in a safe and effective way.
Yeah, I think there's a lack of focus. We everyone's kind of has their eyeball on FDA approval, and that's obviously the first major hurdle. But yeah, rolling these things out that don't have a real existing infrastructure ready for them, commercializing them is going to require all kinds of help. So yeah, I guess that's where the opportunities will present themselves.
Just to caveat, this is true for the psychedelic assisted therapies.
Hmm.
We can probably touch more on the sort of like short acting or no hallucinate, no trip effect psychedelics, the more novel molecules, in a bit. But there has been some very big developments in that. The rigorous infrastructure would be necessary for the more high touch psychoactives. And of course, pharma is not super into building an entire new healthcare system to launch a drug, although I feel like the world is moving in that way, not only in psychedelics, but in longevity, holistic care, um, functional medicine, etc. But again, for another conversation. But yeah, just to touch on the biggest, like what I see as the main, most important enablers for once a drug is approved is, and when I say a drug, again, caveat, framing it in the psychedelic assisted therapy um, bucket, we need to train therapists. Facilitating patients which are in expanded state of consciousness or expanded um, um, or a more vulnerable emotional state. There has to be very rigorous training and certification for therapists. Um, Certain companies are providing that. Um, One of our portfolio companies, for example, Synthesis, is providing that value in preparing therapists, because we'll need a lot of these people. And the second really big hurdle that we need to cross is insurance coverage. Typically, classical commercial insurers, with any medicine, generally speaking, take 2 to 3 years to fully cover a certain new medicine. And that's because they want to collect real world evidence and also have enough demand from prescribers for that medicine. So another portfolio company that we have, Enthea, They have been building an incredible network of providers of root cause medicine therapies, currently already providing ketamine assisted therapy, different than Spravato. It's the more high touch, which is closer to psychedelic assisted therapies when they launch to market. Um, and I believe that they will play a really crucial role for getting early access to these therapies, especially given that they have built a credentialed national network of providers who have been certified in being the best at providing these high touch root cause mental health therapies.
Yes, yeah, definitely. I believe it's Sherry at Enthea. Yeah, I've spoken with her, and she's been at it for a while, building this insurance infrastructure, and she's doing great work. Are you on the board of Enthea?
Yes, I am on the board. We work very closely with them. They are an important and big part of our portfolio. And they have been doing fantastic work, and the team is extremely resilient. And they are now focusing on securing commercial and employer clients. That's their angle. They provide employee um, health coverage. So they have been doing tremendous work, and have been also not only building the provider network, but also now starting to sign up employers to provide that type of health benefit for the employees.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just to make it clear for listeners, so they are working to include psychedelic assisted therapy as part of employer health benefit packages, correct?
Yes, and root cause mental health therapies, so not only psychedelics, but they also now cover stellar ganglion block, which is another functional medicine approach, which is actually very much allowed, available, has been available for a very long time. But because it's not insurance covered, patients are not very aware of it. So again, they're trying to provide access to patients to therapies that are targeting the root cause of mental health ailments. But obviously, psychedelic assisted therapies are very much in that category and leading in that category. So once they start coming onto market, they will start covering those as well.
I think we underestimate how important that piece of the puzzle is, especially in the US. It's going to be great if FDA approves a therapy, but if only a small handful of people can spend out of pocket to afford it, then it's not going to go anywhere. So that work, I mean, I think I spoke to Sherry almost 2 years ago, and she was already starting to speak to some big employers. That's really kind of paradigm shifting, that you have like a major national publicly traded company considering to put psychedelic medicine therapy as part of their health packages. It's huge news, and I think it goes underreported, but that's a really big piece of the puzzle.
Yeah, it's a big undertaking, and also requiring a lot of education.
Indeed.
The way that the stigma was perceived 5 years ago is very different than how people are resonating today, and that's all to do with having rigorous, high quality clinical trial data that is supporting how effective these therapies and medicines are. So as the space is maturing, as we discussed, the stigma is I think the stigma in a stigma
Mhm.
context is not it's not that impactful anymore. People are more questioning whether it actually works or not, so waiting for the data to come out. But as the data is truly coming out, with a lot of very great readouts over the past couple of months. For example, Atai's short-acting 5-MeO nose spray had met all of its endpoints recently in its trials.
Mhm.
Um, People are becoming more and more interested and curious about these therapies. So again, it takes time, but lots of education necessary. But eventually, the data speaks for itself, and I don't think stigma is like an issue, a big issue anymore.
That's interesting. We still think that it is, and I mean, you're in there speaking to investors, speaking to companies, trying to incorporate these new innovative therapies into the mainstream. And if you're feeling that it's not as much of an issue, that's great news. I mean, probably some individuals within the system are still resistant, but yeah, overall, I guess it not just the data, but there's a cultural and societal kind of zeitgeist that's changing over time. These terms and these medicines are more and more accepted, and yeah, it's good news to see that the stigma is not as much of a barrier compared to what you were probably facing a few years ago.
Yeah, especially with the announcement of AbbVie's acquisition of Gilgamesh's drug, bretisilocin, for $1.2 billion. I have investors that 5 years ago were extremely risk averse. They're like, "Oh, psychedelics," like feeling giddy. Um, Traditional investors, and now they are reaching out themselves to me, asking about what's new. Like there's like this excitement of like, oh, where can we channel money. So that's been very refreshing and awesome to see. But again, like stigma and ideology are based on some historical past, but if we're following clear regulatory paths, we are considering payer coverage um with intellect and with understanding of what that takes, and we're following operational playbooks for how to launch these medicines and commercialize them onto market. If it's grounded in that, you know um big pharma playbook, it gives it weight. Um, so stigma and ideology, there can be people can judge, have their own judgments, but if we're following the rigorous requirements to get a drug onto market and we're seeing incredible benefits, then you can't really that sort of like automatically dissolves stigma, at least
Yeah.
in the business and medical sense.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, well said. Makes me think of a thought that we brought up earlier. We were talking about the kind of bottlenecks and infrastructure that's needed in terms of training therapists and kind of building some of that infrastructure that will be needed for the commercial rollouts. And I mean, I've been hearing that for 4 years that we need to build it, and I think let me know if you agree. Now that we've reached this kind of final stage right before drug approval, and you're having big pharma enter with money, what will there be like a rejuvenation of capital into those things? Because we knew we had to solve the therapist bottleneck for years now, but a lot of companies that were focused on clinics and therapy training kind of got stuck, folded, because
Yeah.
the drugs weren't approved yet. So we were kind of like prepping for the rollouts, knowing that we need to train therapists, but there was no drug to commercialize. And actually, so I think there was a misalignment between companies that were preparing for the rollout, but the rollout was still 5 years away. Now that we've advanced and we are at the cusp of actual approval, is there an opportunity for money to come back in and actually, get it done and have the timing be aligned?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And there was this sense of immaturity with the industry and the people building it. Also extremely necessary when you're truly innovating. Because if you're looking from the perspective of legacy frameworks, there will never be that level of innovation. So it was almost necessary to have, starry-eyed people who don't have any experience in launching clinics and uh, experience in getting a drug to market or patenting molecules, everything that touches getting these medicines to market. But it was almost necessary in order to create a wave of curiosity and interest in the space. But to your point, yeah, a lot of the infrastructure companies that whose success is absolutely pending on having a drug to market, um, underestimated how challenging this regulatory process is and how long it takes. Um, but as the industry matures, I'm seeing a lot more seasoned professionals and experts who have had a lifetime of experience of working in pharma and getting these things to market, starting to lead a lot of these companies. So again, as the industry matures, as we're seeing the data, I think that the big capital is only starting now. And in terms of capital, I guess we can, if we look at it in two buckets, sort of like the generalist enthusiast investors, and the more seasoned biopharma professional capital. Um, Initially, we saw mostly enthusiasts like high net worth um, uh, cap high net worth capital, like funding the initial hype curve. I think that especially with big pharma coming into play, we're going to start seeing a lot more of the seasoned biopharma capital also getting a lot of interest into this. And especially because, as we mentioned in the beginning of the conversation, there is an opportunity for label expansion into multiple indications. Trauma is at the core of so many ailments, physical and mental. So as we learn and we generate more data in that, there could be a massive opportunity for label expansion, analogous to GLP-1s, for example.
You mentioned briefly about technology and AI and some lab work. What are moving us slightly away from psychedelics, what are some other spaces, little sectors, conditions that you think are exciting coming up?
I guess this is definitely future of health related. If we look at it into the entire spectrum of how we design drugs, how we test drugs, how we develop drugs, how we learn drugs onto market, etc. In that spectrum of future of health, there is extremely high activity in AI applications in the preclinical steps of drug discovery. So, for example, using AI to generate novel compounds, which is also applicable in psychedelics, by the way. Some companies are using AI to come up with novel molecules. Um, Also, for example, how do we formulate compounds, which is an important step and um, absolutely necessary for making a molecule into a medicine. And a lot of people don't realize that formulation is not um, it's not non-nominal. It's an important step in the development process, or predicting safety profile for different compounds. And typically, R&D, preclinical R&D, is extremely manual. Um, I worked at Novartis doing some R&D work back in like 2014, and now I've been speaking with people who have been really deep into the R&D space, and they joke with me. Well, not really joke, but they're like, "Trust me, nothing has really changed since 2014 in terms of how we do research." So I'm seeing a lot of exciting opportunities in how do we use AI in order to automate and optimize the discovery and development process. So yeah, lots of exciting stuff there.
I think it was one of Atai's drugs, I believe, is expanding into social anxiety disorder in one of their conditions. Maybe this will happen after we get one of the major approvals. Do you see like an expansion into other conditions, social anxiety, postpartum depression, other conditions that are present opportunities?
Yeah, absolutely. And strategically, this is true in pharma as well. You always go for the highest unmet need in terms of indication with the largest patient population, which, of course, it has economical benefit, but also like where are the most people suffering the most? So to your point, first we always go for the most uh, unmet conditions, major depressive disorder or treatment-resistant depression or PTSD, and from there, that can expand more broadly. So I definitely see a very big opportunity of expansion into women's health. For example, um, most of these psychedelics are serotonergic drugs. Serotonin uh, balance in the female body specifically is very much affected from our hormonal systems. Um, a lot more so than males because our hormone system is different. But women suffer a lot from this, and there was a company, I can't recall the name. They were a little bit early 4 years ago who were looking at women's health. Unfortunately, they couldn't manage to raise capital. Not only because psychedelics were at the very beginning super stigmatized, but also because women's health in general is extremely stigmatized, and at the very beginning of understanding how it impacts different ailments, specifically in women, because there's a lot of diseases that only affect women or affect women differently.
Hmm.
Um, which we're yet to discover. And women's health is very challenging to raise capital. There's not that much capital in women's health. And that's another area of personal interest. So combining psychedelics and women's health, it's in the near future, hopefully. But yeah, there's a double whammy stigma and
Well,
lack
yeah.
of capital there. So
I mean, if that seems silly for a variety of reasons, also that there's market opportunity there. Why would you
mm,
shy away? Why would you shy away from half of the population for serving
more
them?
more than half, and we
Yeah.
we live a lot longer. So
Hmm.
our burden on the healthcare system, because we are ignoring and not focusing specifically on women's unique needs, health needs, and wellness needs. It's it's a $16 trillion opportunity, actually. McKinsey put out two versions or two volumes of their women's health reports, which they did in partnership with the World Economic Forum and launched at Davos. Um, Megan Greenfield is a really big global advocate for women's health, but in their estimates, women's health is a 16 trillion plus opportunity, and it's only getting started now, and there's a lot of low-hanging fruit, actually. So yeah, and especially, as I mentioned, like, in the mental health space relevant to psychedelics, there's PMS, endometriosis, there's postpartum depression, there's so many additional or unique indications for women's mental health,
Uh-huh.
that could definitely be a big opportunity for psychedelic assisted therapy.
We published an article, I believe it was last week, about psychedelics and primarily microdosing psychedelics for menopause and to maybe mitigate some of the symptoms. And I believe there's I forgot the name of the company, but they're doing some research on that, on microdosing for menopause and its symptoms. So, and yeah, it ties into some of the points you mentioned. Women have a unique you're unique, and there's opportunities there, and it's good to know that people are starting to look at it and give it the attention it needs. Is there anything else that you're excited about right now? Anything else you want to throw in here and talk about?
Yeah. Actually, I want to, like, go back to some of the hurdles.
Please.
um one very interesting thing that sort of stems from the immaturity or lack of experience of the founders, and not founders, but like the people building these initial companies during the hype bubble or boost uh, is around patents. um, I'm definitely not a patent expert, but recently, and actually first, it was mentioned a couple of years ago that um, Terran Biosciences is creating pretty broad patent portfolio. What I've learned is that a lot of these compounds, these initial compounds, the classic ones that are prior art and have patents around like formulation or manufacturing, but also some of the newer ones, because the companies didn't work with experienced patent lawyers, and didn't have that support, are actually um, have missed the opportunity to patent their molecules more holistically, let's say. Again, not a patent expert, but typically, you patent the molecule, which most people understand clearly, but there's also polymorphic forms of the
Mhm.
molecule, which big pharma, it's like almost a given for big pharma. Um, to patent those, but a lot of companies didn't patent these polymorphic crystalline forms. And in order to make a chemical molecule into a medicine, you need to crystallize it and create it into you know, um, a, a compound that can be made into a pill or whatever. So what I have been hearing recently is that, a lot of the big leading psychedelic drug development companies had not have not had a well-informed strategy around patenting. So we'll see how that affects everything, but this is so important because a very recent example from big pharma is the most successful drug known to mankind so far is Humira, and they have generated uh $200 billion in revenue, and now they have gone off patent, but they continue sales because they had a very strong patent strategy where they patent everything, every polymorphic form, every variant of that drug. So that has allowed them to dominate and continue dominating the market. And it's a very classic pharma play. But again, like, you need to have had experience, uh, many, many years of decades of experience in pharma to be aware that you need to think about these things and how important they are, like 10, 15 years down the line. And that's what I always say, like, the most important thing and the most challenging thing for starting a drug development company is like you need to be aware of so many things in this very regulated space that are not going to be relevant for many, many years. But you need to make decisions today because they will absolutely impact your commercial, regulatory, competitive viability down the line. So that's a very interesting thing that I'm excited to see how it will pan out and how it would affect and impact these bigger players. Um, so yeah, just wanted to talk about that, but
Yeah.
would definitely I'll let you comment.
No, no, no. We're gonna see how that plays out. Yeah, there was a kind of mini patent wars happening with some players in the space, and yeah, I think Terran was being quite innovative. Terran Biosciences, I think, was being quite innovative and aggressive in their patent strategies. Yeah, I guess post approval, we'll see. I mean, you think some of these big psychedelic drug development companies will have some surprises? Do you think they're set up well for that future post approval?
Yeah, I think, there's paths to working with Terran, for example. Um, you can look at it in two ways. Like, okay, they had this aggressive strategy, and also, well, these guys understood what is necessary on a big pharma level, so they did all the research, uh, preclinical research to develop these polymorphic forms and kind of like de-risk the molecule itself. Now, I'm sure that we're gonna see conversations between these big other drug development guys and Terran about this patent situation. But I think it will be absolutely necessary for these other players um, to have a well-rounded patent portfolio if they at all want big pharma to even look at them.
Uh-huh.
So I actually see it more as an opportunity because they can strengthen their molecule and patents around the molecule in order to attract big pharma. And when it's done right, as we have seen with Gilgamesh and AbbVie, there's a very big opportunity in that. Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, that's kind of like where my thoughts are.
Yeah, I'm assuming the Gilgamesh acquisition, they must have crossed all their T's in terms of patents if they got that acquisition done. Also, it was a novel compound, I believe, so maybe that's why
Yeah.
it made the patent
Oh,
situation easier.
definitely. Yeah.
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 Yeah, it's gonna be
Yeah.
interesting, like, there's been a lot of questions floating around MindMed's patent future because, it's LSD. And, there's been a lot of questions on and doubts, on how their patent strategy will, like, unfold once things hit market. So, yeah, there'll be some interesting things.
Yeah. I mean, I've been framing it in this way for the past 5 years on conferences and everything. It's like the way I see it is like we start with the classics. Yes, there's certain limitations to patents because they're prior art, known compounds. As I mentioned, there's an opportunity to patent the manufacturing process or the formulation or the route of administration, etc. These are sort of weaker patents, but they are patents. And I think it was absolutely crucial to start with these molecules because we have a wealth of clinical and preclinical research from the 50s, 60s into the 70s, depending on the molecule. But then the second wave was always these novel molecules. And these novel molecules aim to optimize safety profile. For example, ibogaine, like very well known side effects on the heart. And Gilgamesh is working on creating a molecule that um, is optimized for these side effects so that it's safer, which I think absolutely must be done. Or in terms of commercial hurdles, if LSD has, 12, 14 hour, requirement to sit with, uh, uh, um, like a professional healthcare worker, we have to compensate them for their time. So a lot of them are looking into like non-psychoactive or short acting, creating novel molecules around that. And the sort of the third wave, which we already touched on, is like expanded indications. Actually, there's an interesting example here from our portfolio, 2A Biosciences. They are working on creating novel serotonergic drugs, but they're which are non-psychoactive, and they're looking. Their lead compound is for ophthalmology. So macular degeneration, goes into the like neurodegenerative sort of bucket of indication opportunity. So they are creating a novel molecule and also going for a very interesting indication that um, no other psychedelic company or serotonergic company is actually looking at. And yeah, so there is definitely a lot more to see from the industry in terms of its maturity and expansion, horizontal expansion. And it's exciting to see what will come out of this.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I'd love to speak again. There's gonna be a new reality in a year or two from now. Things are gonna look a little bit different, and there'll be new opportunities and new directions, I think, pretty soon.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. Um, the next um, year to 2 years are definitely going to be like very interesting. Maybe even more interesting. It's like analogous to the initial hype curve, and
Hmm.
now we're getting um, the maturity curve. And a lot
Yeah.
of these compounds that have been in clinical research are reaching phase two, phase three. Typically, big pharma acquisitions happen around phase two, as we saw with Gilgamesh as well. So, yeah, I'm excited to see, and I feel like there might be a big pharma play with um Atai Beckley's um DMT product because it's short
Yeah.
acting. So
It's short acting.
that'll be
Yeah.
exciting to see. Yeah.
Yeah, it kind of fits the Spravato model nicely. Let's do this again soon and touch base, and we can see where we're at and where some of your companies are at, what you're working on. Let's do this again soon. I appreciate your insights.
Awesome. Sounds great. I really enjoyed the conversation, Jason. Thank you for having me.
No, thank you. It was great. Speak soon.